swimmingly. And swimmingly is quite the word actually this week, because I went on holiday in the UK and it rained quite a lot. So swimmingly is definitely the word. But if it's 5:15 UK time and if it's a Tuesday, then it's the Franchise Show. And great to have people with us. If you're there, please comment. Your comments drive the show either before or after and during the show. We like to involve those where we can. I always like to start with going through the premise of the show, why I came up with it and what it's all about. So it's really to create a safe space for debate and discussion, to connect people, to form collaborations, to make the franchise world more informed, and to connect people and have these conversations. And we're bringing together people to have conversations both on the screen and more importantly in the comments, because we're one big group, we're one big community. And the more we work together, then the better. We become stronger when we do things together. And apart from this being a LinkedIn Live, we're going to be doing some other things as well. So we're looking at maybe some YouTube shorts, some how-to guides might be coming out soon, some sort of top 10 lists, that type of thing. So the content that we're going to create hopefully will be more than just the 45 minutes that we're together today. And really start to create a good sense of community within the franchise world. So that's kind of the premise of the show. Each week we try and deal with a different topic. And this week the topic is the power of franchise groups. And I think it's a great topic because it's a nice wide-ranging conversation. You know, a group can be anything from a small collaboration group of 2 or 3 people to a peer-to-peer group within the franchising world or other worlds, which could maybe have a couple of dozen people in, or it could go right up to a group with 200,000 people in. And it's kind of what we can do together and what the power of those groups are and how we can work together. So I'm going to be really interested to hear everyone's thoughts on collaborations and on the power of groups within their world and within the franchising world. Now, with that, I'd like to introduce Mr. Gary McGill. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Gary. Known Gary for a while, and Gary has quite a number of groups on LinkedIn, some of them with 200,000 plus members in. So it's a really interesting conversation to have with Gary, and really looking forward to delving deep into the conversation of franchise groups. So with that in mind, I'd just like to hand things over to Gary for a moment to say hi, and give some opening thoughts on franchise groups.
Oh, thanks, Harvey. Hello, everyone. I rarely do podcasts because, as I said to Harvey, the first thing you look at on a podcast is the camera, and you go to yourself, "Oh my God, stage fright."
So get yourself a hat, Gary.
Yeah,
it's all good if you get a hat.
Yeah, I've been involved in LinkedIn groups back in the noughties. So I would presume that the first group was started around about 2008. And the groups, for whatever reason, have grown quite dramatically in those years. LinkedIn, when I started, was in the early budding stages. And I'm not sure if I was to start again from scratch today, if I could accomplish what I have now, because the people that are starting out from the beginning have got a different scenario than what they did, say, 15 years ago. One reason is LinkedIn is a lot bigger. LinkedIn has also tightened down on communication. So the ability to communicate with people is not the same as what it was, say, 15 years ago. Although I do look at myself as being rather fortunate, because my largest single LinkedIn group, which I would like to believe is the world's largest for the keyword franchising, should by tomorrow hit 100,000 members. So it's growing dramatically, and I'm hoping within a year it'll be 300,000 plus, and so the numbers stack up and stack up and stack up. What I think is beautiful about this is, if you're getting into franchising or you're already in franchising and you want to go global, you can, of course, go the traditional routes. You can go via franchise consultants, or you can go to trade shows and so on. But why not consider a pre-existing channel that already goes across the globe and is growing quite dramatically each year? Because with the numbers that big, statistically speaking, there should be some decision makers in both organizations that want to invest in franchises. So the end client base should, in theory, already be there, in addition to many of the big franchise brands, which are looking for clients to invest in franchising. Mm-hmm. And it's really a mindset with people. Do you want to use this conduit to reach the target client base? Or do I want to go the other route, where I go to trade shows, I invest big money and so on, with possibly questionable results, versus a communication medium that is essentially free of charge? It's already pre-existing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're really right there, and it's really interesting to sort of hear the history of how those groups began. And I think you're right. I think we are in a different world. I think before we continue our conversation, just want to recognise a few people who've joined us here today. So we've got Simon here. Simon is a great pal of mine. I'm sure you know Simon, great franchise recruiter, and he's been on the show. We've got Johnny Joseph from LA as well. We're global, you see. Johnny's a great chap. He's doing franchise audits, and he's going to be on the show as well. We've got a new name here, Ben Stacey. Great to have you here, Ben. Really pleased that you're joining us. Really interested to hear your thoughts on franchise groups as well. We've got Kelly here as well. And Kelly is a great friend of mine. I've done a few LinkedIn Lives with Kelly, and she's got her own show called The Awesome Journey, which follows this show at 1:11 Eastern Time and 6:11 here in the UK. So just wanted to recognise a few of the wonderful people that have joined us at the moment. I suppose one of the questions that I had for you, Gary, is how do you manage a group of individuals that size? It's such a big group, such a big number. When you talk about 230,000, does it manage itself, or do you have to do it?
I wish I could say it manages itself, but you do have to do a bit of housekeeping. Very quickly, there's a note here about the name of the franchising group. I've actually found, I've actually made it simple to find. I've tagged it to a URL address called highpowerednetworking.com. So if you type in highpowerednetworking.com, that will take you straight to the group.
What I would do as well is I'll put a link in the conversation after this, so people can easily find it.
Yeah, because I mean, the problem because there are so many groups out there on LinkedIn, and because LinkedIn gives so many weird, wonderful URL addresses, I made it very simple for people to find it by registering a URL and rediverting it back to that particular group. But to answer your question, Harvey, it's not self-running, particularly now it's getting larger, because the main annoyance of getting something this big is the attempts at spam. There's a lot of non-industry related spamming attempts, which, if I didn't have the filters up, would probably overrun the discussion groups.
Yeah. I can imagine. That's a problem. How many of those 200,000 are relevant to the industry? It's a really interesting point, I think.
Yeah, I mean if I wasn't vigilant, there'd be so many individuals that want to offer you resume services.
Yeah.
We will write your resume, or that there'd be so many market research companies with market research reports that just keep going on and on and on, and probably not even related to this business sector. And I think the latest one is, do you want Six Sigma training?
Right. Yeah.
So,
yeah, absolutely. So I think you've made a really interesting and relevant point, that you can have a big group, but you've got to be careful how and what makes up that big group, and that keep that group relevant. I mean, I've always been interested in going deep rather than wide in terms of collaborations. So having a smaller but very relevant group is always quite interesting to me, or a bigger group that's split down into some smaller groups. We've all had the situation where we've gone to a big Christmas do, or works Christmas do, or something like that, and generally speaking, it breaks down into sort of smaller groups. If there's 200 people there, there'd be 20 sets of smaller groups. I think that's sometimes the way it goes. Simon's just asked a question of you there, Gary, so let's just bring that one up. So he's asked what brought you into franchising. So that's a good question there, Simon.
Well, originally I started building up my contacts. I've I've been in the global business development field on and off for the last 30 odd years. So you get to a point where you get really, really old. But I was primarily originally in the food equipment end of bits and pieces, and I originally diversified into franchising contacts in the old days, primarily to help find a customer base for what I was doing. And now I'm purely in consulting. My field of operations is now more encompassing. So I do work on some franchise projects as well, and you'd be quite surprised by some of the names that come forward from a network this huge. And by having a network this huge, it's very quick and easy to find. I mean, if you work it out, I've been doing the numbers here. When you're in LinkedIn, every single group that you join is an opportunity cost. You have a maximum of 50 groups that you can join on LinkedIn, of which you can own 30 groups. So in theory, that's 30 groups you own. So to make up the 50, 20 that you can join. So when you are working out your LinkedIn portfolio, what am I going to do to reach the people specifically I'm looking for? Each group that you choose to join, you've got to be very strategic about, because there is that limitation.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting what you've said there as well. I think LinkedIn and other platforms put limitations on, and they put limitations on sometimes for good reason, to stop certain spam and various things like that. But it's like there's a limit to the number of connection requests you can make, and there's a limit to the number of groups you can be in. So everything that you do has to be relatively strategic. You used to have, I think it was 700 a week. You could connection requests. And that's back down to 100, I think. So yeah, I think you're right. And I think it's always been the way that when you form partnerships, when you form strategic collaborations, they've got to be strategic. If you just go with the flow and what comes along, it's not really going to follow whatever plan you might have. I just wanted to bring up another point that Simon has made. It's always great to have Simon. He always makes some really good points. You have to make sure you offer your group members something special, I believe. So we make sure that all our vacancies are posted on our jobs in franchising group before we post anywhere else. Yeah. I think Simon's made a really good point about a group. Make that group feel part of a community that is worthwhile. And that's exactly the premise of this show. We all sit here and have a conversation together, and Simon is absolutely, he's on the stage here, where he's driving the conversation today. And it's about bringing value to the community or to the group that you're in. And I think the bigger that group gets, the perhaps, and you may disagree here, Gary, but is it harder to bring value when you have such a big group? Or do you think there are still ways to do that?
Well, I mean, as with all things in life, there's the narrative and the counter narrative. And there's no one single answer. Smaller groups are good, particularly if you own them, because you can control what people you want to hopefully get on board, and then you can customize and specialize who you want on there. Or if you have an approach where you want to have a global conduit, and there is the statistical likelihood that the sort of person that you want might already be there, then there is the benefit of the bigger groups that are likely to have that contact in that group. And some of the people in the big group actually quite surprised me, because you get some really, really senior people from some multinationals that are sitting there in the background, not necessarily saying much because they're sitting back and observing. But if you can get their attention, then I presume some quite exceptional things could potentially happen.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. That people perhaps lots of people sit there in the background and observe, and again, you get that if you're a sort of a company meeting, you'll get people who are quiet. Yeah. And it's not because they're not interested, they're quiet because they're listening with intent. And I often talk about how important listening is and asking good questions. And yeah, I think you're right. You might have a big group, but it's about seeing who is interested, who is adding value, and who you can add value for. Again, it's like this show, lots of invites go out, lots of interesting people register to attend, of which conversations start with, and the good thing about having it as in various different forms as we're going to do it, that hopefully it will continue to add value and people can go back and look at it, and we'll produce these different things. And like you say, that's then going to potentially bring people to the table that you wouldn't normally expect to be there. So yeah, really valuable. Just again, before we continue, I'd like to recognize everybody who's here. So Ashif, a good friend of mine, never met Ashif, but he's on a wonderful LinkedIn Live regular contributor to Don Cohen's Hour of Empower, of which I've been on several times. So really, really interesting guy. Always has a lot of value to add. So he's put, good to be here for good learnings. I agree with focus groups producing focused results. Yeah, I think even with a big group, it's about focusing in on what those opportunities are. And they may not come from where you expect them to come from. So in that way, if you have a big group and you cast your net wider, as long as you can keep your eyes open, then you're going to see those opportunities, those collaborations, and where value can be added both ways.
Yeah.
What Simon said here. So Simon's come back with, are LinkedIn groups monetized? Is there an asset value which can be sold on by the group owner? No idea.
No,
Gonna pass that one over to you, Gary.
I couldn't tell you offhand.
I think it's probably the case that things like that start to have a value that's not necessarily in that asset itself. It's almost by association and by what you do with that group.
Yeah.
You know, so it's probably a tricky one to be sold. You know, the group has great value. In fact, all groups, all collaboration groups have good value.
Yeah.
But whether it's a monetizable, saleable value, such as I don't know, a number of subscribers on YouTube or something like that, I'm not sure. But it's a really interesting question as to whether it can be monetized in that way.
But I think the interesting thing is that everyone joins a group because they hope that some business can result from being there. And I would presume that potentially the bigger the group, although it's not necessarily the case, the amount of money that's probably generated through people connecting with other people by letting these contacts be aware of what it is they've got.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think you're right. I just wanted to welcome Joe here. Joe is a great friend and colleague of mine from across the pond, does a fantastic show, Franchise Chats, an audio show on a Friday. I'm regularly listening in on that one. So great to have you here, Joe. Thanks for popping along. And it's great to see you. Looking forward to hearing your thoughts on franchise groups and peer groups. But great to have you here. I suppose one thing that I was going to say, because when I think about groups, I mean, I've always been a bit of a collaborator, you know, even before the days of LinkedIn and social media. You know, what's your sort of thoughts on really small 1 or 2 person collaboration groups? Do you think that, you know, they have a good value and are worth setting up that sort of size group?
I think everything has value. I think that setting up your own channel, your own network into the industry is essential. I mean, I said earlier that I probably couldn't create anything if I was starting again from scratch today of this size, because of the enormous amount of competition. But I don't think that should stop anyone. No. It's really a question of being creative and letting people become aware of the fact that you've got your own individual groups out there.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, because I appreciate it was a very different world, lots of different parameters a long time ago. But if you were to do it again, or if you were to, you were in that position where you were thinking, I'll set up a group now, in the world that we're sort of living in with the kind of the systems and processes that we have, you know, what would your advice be to if someone was planning to set up their own group on LinkedIn, as an example?
Well, my advice is that you need to use all your digital assets at your disposal. Have a diversified portfolio. So, for example, if you use Twitter or if you use Instagram or those other services, always mention the LinkedIn group that you've got. Let people know that it's a certain size. This is what it specializes in. Because the problem you've got is that when you start a LinkedIn group from scratch, and I could be wrong, but my understanding of, or at least my perception of how it operates, you start off at the bottom, because once you start searching for a group to look for, my impression is that normally the larger groups appear first, and then it's a descending order. So you're actually pushed to the back of the line, but that's not a bad thing. Not a bad thing at all. So if I was starting again from scratch, I would make sure that I have all the branding for the group up there. The headers are current. Make sure that there's a good value add. Police it for any spamming, which would put people off joining. Diversified portfolio with Facebook and so on, as I just mentioned, and see where you go from there. Because just because it's highly competitive out there on groups and people wanting to get attention, it shouldn't really stop you from trying in the first place.
No, I think you're right, and you know, it depends where you're trying to go with that group, what you're trying to do. You know, and I think it's just about building a particular community. You know, you're just building a community, and you can do that in different ways. You know, a LinkedIn Live is a great way of building a community. You know, especially with some other things that go along with that. But you know, you're building a relatively small, certainly when you compare to sort of hundreds of thousands, but you know, you're building a community of people that are very much in the world that you're in. And you know, when you do a show for a half an hour or an hour, you know, there's lots of opportunities for commenting, conversations, and collaborations with people that, you know, that get involved in the show. Very quickly, and I need to mention Don Cohen, who's on the screen now. Don is a fantastic chap, has a show every day. He's been doing a LinkedIn Live every day for about a year and a half. It's Hour of Empower, the show that I'm on with Kelly sometimes. It's a fantastic show. 11 o'clock Eastern, 4 p.m. UK time, just before this show. So check out Hour of Empower with Don. Lovely chap, good friend of mine. And yeah, he's taught me all I know about LinkedIn Live. So if I mess it up, it's your fault, Don. But I think the other thing that I was going to start to talk about is peer-to-peer groups. Because I think that and I know this is not necessarily in your sort of area of expertise, but certainly in franchising, you know, you might have a number of franchisees, and you might want to connect those franchisees together within a group. And there's various different sort of schools of thought on this. You know, you can have one franchisee that is really excelling, really, you know, really doing well. And then you can perhaps have some others that are struggling for whatever reason. And by putting them in that peer group together, do you bring up the ones that are struggling by putting them together? Or do you hold back the one that's, you know, that's excelling? You know, so I guess my question is, if you were involved in a peer-to-peer group, do you think a nice mix of different people, or do you think people in a very similar position work well?
My gut feeling is a mix, because everyone can learn from everyone.
Yeah.
And the problem you get is if you get too many top people or too many low people. I'm a great believer in out of the box thinking, and if people get it wrong, they can be given advice. And it also prevents, at least I believe it prevents, this concept called groupthink, where people get a certain mindset and they say, okay, this is the way it is, but this mindset is completely divorced of the reality of what they should really be doing. So by having a different demographic sampling, everyone can then go, okay, that's an interesting idea. Never considered that, but so many people are talking about it. Maybe we should take a look at it. Because certain corporations, well, in fact, all corporations, there is a certain amount of dysfunctionality. So if they can hear from people outside the corporation, maybe this is not the right way of doing it, they might be more willing to embrace different ideas.
Yeah, I think so. I think if you have a good mix of people, you'll get a diverse range of thoughts, and opinions, and then you're going to get a better end result. I think another question might be, I'm certainly on LinkedIn. Do you think there's more that a group can achieve than an individual alone? Not, in the franchising world, but generally on LinkedIn as a group, is the things that you can achieve together that you can't achieve alone? I think there certainly is. I think that, if I can't do it, can we? Now, I'm using an expression from the wonderful Don Cohen there, but it's something that it resonates with me, because we're not alone. We've got an amazing pool of potential collaborations and talent on LinkedIn and various other platforms. And, we can dip into it as we wish. And there's always an opportunity to just surround yourself and immerse yourself in really interesting and talented people. So, I don't mean to answer my own question there, but I think we can. What do you think?
Well, what I think is, what I love about LinkedIn is, I don't know if you've heard of a concept called Dunbar numbers.
Dunbar numbers? Yeah,
Dunbar. It's it was a concept that came up in the 1990s by a guy called Robin Dunbar. And what he said was that as human beings, we can only process something like a mean average of about 150 relationships. It's a psychological balancing act. But by automating stuff digitally on platforms like LinkedIn groups, which of course surpass that magical 150 number, that should be able to basically put your cognitive skills on steroids, going beyond your human limitations and going beyond what you might be able to find as a person doing the traditional sales technique with so many people already out there. And I don't know if you're familiar with the 80-20 rule, where 80% of your business comes from 20% of the people you speak to. But presumably, if you can get that 20% of the people you're speaking to larger, then the potential returns on embracing this type of communication medium then become extremely lucrative.
That's very interesting, because I think everybody out there has heard the 80-20 rule, and you're absolutely right. 20% of 100,000 is a lot more than 20% of 10. And it's still the 80-20 rule. So I think that's a really interesting way to look at it. I thought it was fascinating as well about the fact that the human mind can only handle a certain amount of relationships. I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, the mean average is about 150. So which, although that's an average, some people will only be able to handle less than that. And you get some exceptional people that can handle a little bit more.
That's really interesting. And I'll tell you why I find that so fascinating. And I hadn't heard of it, but I find that really fascinating, because when you think about the relationships, the business relationships you have, you might work with 30 people, and you might have to have a relationship with all of those. You might have, 20 potential customers, or, 50 colleagues, and with that number, and I find it really interesting, because business relationships kind of come and go. Oh, forgive me, I've got a squeaky chair. It's probably going to really get to a lot of people, and I may even have to swap this out. In fact, I'm going to. Hold on. try this one. That's better. If that was bothering anybody, my apologies. I now don't have a squeaky chair. But yeah, I found that really interesting because, yeah, I think relationships come and go, you know, and I sometimes think, you know, is that natural? They just naturally fade away. But it makes a lot of sense what you were saying there about the fact that if you can't process and then you find a new, I don't know, more relevant to the time of your life or what's going on, and you're focusing on that, others have to fall by the wayside. So that's a really interesting takeaway for me, actually. You know, I always learn a lot of things from these chats. Just very quickly, just wanted to see what Simon had to say here. In franchising, I have always found it useful to have peer-to-peer groups between franchisees that were at the same stage on the franchise life cycle. What do you think? Well, I think that's very interesting and you know, well worth a conversation. I think there are benefits because you're going to get people who are like-minded. They're going through the same things together. But I think the argument against it is maybe if you've got somebody who was further down the franchise life cycle, they can share some things that effectively for the other people are ahead for them. So I think it's a really interesting, and it's one of the reasons I wanted to have this discussion. And I think that this discussion will probably carry on over episodes in the future because, you know, that very question there is probably a 45-minute conversation. But I think it's worth, if you were planning to set up some peer-to-peer groups, it's worth experimenting to see which ones work. I think they're going to all have value. And I think it will depend on the business and the individuals concerned. But what a great question to think about, you know, because this isn't always about answers. This is about questions, you know, and if you're asking those, if you've got that question in your mind, you're going to think about it. And then you're going to make a better, more informed decision when you do put a peer-to-peer group together because you'll think about that. So great point there, Simon. Let's just move on to a couple of other things. There you go. One relationship is enough for me. Well, I can certainly resonate with, I guess, the juggling nature of trying to balance several relationships. Yeah. And there's definitely, especially if you've got several franchisees all at different stages of their journey, and you're picking up on meetings or conversations with them. Yeah, I can, that resonates with me, that you can only handle a certain amount of relationships. It's really, really interesting. So we've got Penny here. Great to have you here, Penny. Penny, a lovely lady and the author of a fantastic book, Manual Magic, with which I have the book, and she's going to be a guest on the show. And she's put here, I'm a member of a true US mastermind group. We all have different skills as writers, developmental editors, etc., in diverse areas. Each contributes a unique perspective to solve an issue and to help each other. Some of us are competitors, but we are, and I'm going to have to do that to read it, but we are transparent and support each other. Curiosity, the 80-20 rule applies. I think that's a great point. I think what I like about that is having a group where you've identified a set of skills that are required to achieve something. And that you're selecting people to be in that group that have the required skill set, and then you can focus on your speciality. This actually reminds me, strangely, this reminds me of something my mum told me. And my mum used to go on these walks. They were nature walks. And she'd go on these walks, and there would be people that were experts on mushrooms or experts on ferns or insects, and they would all have their speciality, and it would make the walk that much more enjoyable. And I think it's a very similar thing here. I think especially with these smaller mastermind groups, if you get that right mix of people, each bringing their own kind of chapter to it, you're going to get something that is better than if you try and attempt that on your own. So, yeah. Great point. What do you think about that? I mean, there's mastermind groups, and do you think they're different to the type of groups?
Well, I mean, big is not always better. The beauty of these smaller groups is that, well, for one thing, the flow of the postings presumably slows down, because with the groups I've got that are so huge, there are people there that jump on, and there are many posts that go through the group on a daily basis. Whereas you have a smaller group, it's more niche, more specialized. The individual posts presumably will go down slower, so people have more time to digest the content that's being posted out there. But yeah, I'm all for it.
Yeah, that's great. Just come back with something that Penny said there. We have a guest expert every month too. Yeah, no, that's it. So exactly what we were saying there, that there's clearly a group there that contains the required expertise for something to be achieved. And now relating that back to the franchise world, if you were to create a group that, let's say you were planning to franchise a business that you've got, it's a great example of where you could perhaps create that group. You create a group of individuals that have all got the required skills, and perhaps all need to market those skills for other reasons. But coming together as a group, you can all achieve more than you could have if you tried to do it alone. Because nobody can be an expert on everything that they need to be, you struggle sometimes to be an expert in one particular field. So to have to surround or to immerse yourself in the required strategic talent, I suppose, is a really interesting thing to do. And I think that's a great point. I mean, one of the questions we were just talking, you just said there that, big isn't always better. And I think that it's an interesting point. And I think an interesting question is whether you cast a net wide or whether you try and focus your attentions on something.
Yeah.
A lot of people on LinkedIn and other platforms talk about various numbers that they're looking at, whether that be impressions, comments, likes, whatever it might be. And it's really interesting to see how relevant they are. I mean, I do a post every Sunday to try and help people that are looking for a new job. Right? And on that particular post, I am interested in spreading the net wide because it's a very diverse group of people. But for this show, it's about a conversation between a group of people. And, that group might be a few hundred. It might be, 10 or 12 people on the day, and that conversation continues. So it's about going much more streamlined and delving much deeper into a group of quite skilled individuals, but are all very much focused on one particular thing.
Yeah.
Just very quickly, just want to say cheerio to Simon. Thank you so much for being here today, Simon. It's, as always, a pleasure to have you in the comments, and you've really helped drive the show today. So thanks for being here, and I'll catch up with you soon, no doubt. But yes, I think, there's other things to sort of discuss about groups. I've been involved in some WhatsApp groups, things like that, help support when you're on other platforms in different ways. And I'm involved in a few different groups. One of those has about 90 members, and there are different chats, but it's almost overwhelming sometimes to have a group that big. And I think that needs to be split down a little bit and directed a little bit more. I would like to name drop and give a shout out to the Hounds of the Business Hour as well. That's one of the wonderful groups, and I'm a part of. And I'd like to give that group a shout out. Have a check out of that particular group while we're talking about groups. We're sort of getting towards the end now. One of the things that I like to do as well on this is we're talking about groups, so we're talking about collaboration, and we're talking about what we can do together. We're talking about how we can add value to the franchising community. And one of the things that I like to do is LinkedIn have things called collaborative articles. And if you don't know about these things, they're AI generated, but they encourage people within different communities to add their contribution towards it. And it's something that I sometimes contribute towards. But what I always like to do is to bring up one of the points and add it into the comments, and people can have a little look at that. And then what I'm going to do is add people's comments to the LinkedIn article. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to very briefly bring up the collaborative article. So here it is. And it says, how can you use your franchise network to solve common problems? And there's a few different sections here, but I'm going to just click this particular one here. And I'm going to add this to the comments, and I'll quickly read it now. So it says connect with other franchisees. And this is something we've definitely discussed today. One of the benefits of franchising is that you are part of a network of like-minded business owners who share the same goals and values. You can connect with other franchisees through online platforms, social media groups, newsletters, or events organized by the franchisor or the franchise association. By communicating with your peers, you can exchange ideas, tips, best practices, feedback, and referrals. You can also learn from their successes and mistakes to avoid reinventing the wheel. So what I'm going to do, I am going to add this section to the comments, and when we've got some comments in about it, I'm going to put it there and put whoever's made the comment afterwards. So I'm just going to quickly come back onto here, stop sharing that, and in the comments section, I'm going to add that particular comment. So people can have a little look at that, give their thoughts on that, and then these collaborative articles are then truly collaborative. And hopefully we are using the power of a group, of this wonderful group and this wonderful community that we have in the franchise world to add true value to these articles. And that's what I wanted to do. So yeah, let me know. It doesn't have to be during the show today, but let me know your thoughts on that, and as and when we get those in, we can add those on. Just very quickly, we've got Minerva here. Great business opportunity. Proper management is imperative. Yeah, absolutely. I think that I think with any business opportunity, managing that opportunity is really important. And I think being part of a group can help you manage any opportunities. I think seeing the opportunity is something that comes from within, but developing the opportunity is something that comes from a point of sharing it with others and working together as well. So as I say, we're kind of coming to the end, so we're going to wrap things up fairly soon. One of the things I wanted to do, Gary, is make sure everybody can connect with you, that they know how to join your groups. So is there some good ways, apart from obviously looking up your name and connecting with you on LinkedIn? Is there a good way to join those groups that you'd like to share?
Well, the largest single group I tagged to the URL address, highpowerednetworking.com.
Great.
So that makes it a lot easier. To find my profile, I've tagged that to the URL address, GaryMcGill.com. And McGill is spelled McGill, which makes it a lot easier to find me. And in terms of joining, it's all down to the individual. They can join if they want to join something that's huge. But the main benefit of something huge is it's a straightaway global conduit. And it only takes meeting one contact with the right buying power that could increase your bottom line by a few percentage points. So it's all relative, really.
No, I completely agree with you. And what you've just said there, that it only takes one connection. I often say that it only takes one connection to change your life. And I think that's really relevant here. It could only take one connection to join you into a group that gives you an opportunity that sets you down a new road. So it really can do that. So I think my final thoughts here is to people to keep collaborating, keep connecting. We're growing a huge community here of fantastic people that are very well connected. So check out who's attending, check out who's commenting, send a connection request, join Gary's groups there, send a connection request to him and to me. And as we continue with this show and building this community, we'll get stronger together.
And one other thing to conclude with, Harvey, I get a new connection request on my LinkedIn profile every single day through these LinkedIn groups because of the high exposure.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. No, fantastic. Well, look, Gary, thank you so much for your time today and being a fantastic guest. It was an absolute pleasure to talk with you, and I'm sure we will have to do this again, no doubt, because it's a conversation that needs a lot of talking about. But for today, thank you for your time. Thank you for everyone who's been here today. Really looking forward to next Tuesday. I will see you all again, 5:15 GMT, 12:15 EST. And for now, thanks very much and goodbye.